What's up, my people? In this video, we're going to be graphing quadratics in standard form. But before we get into the actual graphing part, I'm going to give you some notes that you're going to want to take down. These are some pointers that's going to help when you graph. It's going to make things a lot easier, and it'll also help you check your work, okay? So let's jump right in. There's two forms when you graph in quadratics. The first one is vertex form. And that form looks like this: y equals a x minus h squared plus k. That's the first form, and people find that one the easiest form. But the form we're going to be dealing with today is called standard form. And standard form is a x squared plus b x plus c. Okay? And while we're here, let's go ahead and talk about this. Your a is always in front of your x squared. Your b is always just in front of your x. And then your c, including the sign, let's not forget the sign, is always the number in the very back. And if you've already done vertex form, you know some of these rules. Let's go ahead and refresh. If this might be brand new to you, so we can write this down. A does a couple of things. The first thing A tells us is the direction of opening. If A is positive, that means you have an open up. And anytime, and it looks like that. Okay? And if you have a negative, if A happens to be negative, you have an open down. Now, also I want to point out that all open ups have a minimum, and all open downs have a maximum. So when I say by minimum, if you actually look at this, this is a lowest point that makes it a minimum. There's nothing that's lower than that. And then if it opens down, it looks like this, which means that there is a maximum. There is a top point. That is the highest it goes. So anytime you have an open up, you have a minimum, and anytime you have open down, you have a maximum. Okay? A also will tell you if your A is a fraction, that means you're going to have a more wide so it might look, it could be wide like that. If you have a whole number, and that whole number, you want it bigger than 0. Well, for the purpose of this, when it's bigger than 0, it makes it more, I can't write with this pen, makes it more narrow, okay? And then the other thing I want to point out while I'm on over here, this right here is always your y-intercept. That's going to come in handy because later on, we have to identify the y-intercept. We have to identify if we have a minimum or a maximum. So that's how you're going to be able to look. Just know, but if it's positive, you're going to have a minimum opening up, and then if you have a negative, you'll have an open down, which means you have a maximum. Okay. All right. The next thing I want to point out, there's this formula called the quadratic formula. I'm just going to separate that for just a minute. The quadratic formula this is the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c That's all over 2a. And we'll talk about what it's for in a minute. But when you break the quadratic formula into two pieces, this negative b over 2a actually helps us find one thing, and this b squared minus 4ac helps us to find something else. That b squared minus 4ac is actually called a discriminant. Okay, so let's talk about what a discriminant does and why discriminant might be helpful. So the discriminant is the b squared minus 4ac. And this formula is used, that is not how you spell that. To tell how many solutions there are. And let's do a quick recap. And if you've never heard this before, there's an acronym I use called ROCKS. R stands for roots. The O is the excuse me, O is the O in zero or zeros. X stands for x-intercepts. And S stands for solutions. And the reason I bring up rocks is because roots, zeros, x-intercepts, and solutions all mean the same exact thing. So I can literally say, what are the solutions? Or I can ask you, what are the roots? And I'm asking you for the same information, okay? Now, if this, when you plug in your B from the previous, from the formula, you got your A and your C. If, here are some of your rules. If your B squared minus 4AC is positive, that means you have two solutions. That means that when you graph, it's going to cross your x-axis twice. Maybe something like this. It could look like something like that. That's a two solutions if your B minus 4AC is positive. We're going to talk, you'll see some examples of this in a few moments. Now, if your B squared minus 4AC happens to be 0, that means you have one solution. And that picture looks like this. You might have what I call a bounce. It'll hit the x-axis once and go back up the other way, and it'll do one of these. That is called a bounce. That's what I call it. And then if your answer happens to be negative, this is 0 solutions. Or you can put no solutions. And what that will look like, it looks like your graph did one of these or one of those. It never touches the x-axis at all. Okay? So that's what your pictures looks like utilizing the discriminant. So now let's get into the stuff that's really good for us today in regards to the graphing. Okay, here we go. All right, so remember how I told you This right here is important. We're going to talk about it right now. This part is what I'm about to address. So, to find the x coordinate of the vertex, you're going to use negative b divided by 2a. So that's where this formula right here, or that piece of the formula, comes in handy. So when we're graphing quadratics, I'm going to go ahead and give you some steps. Step 1. Before you can graph them, you need to identify A, B, and C. You got to identify your A, B, and C. Step 2, find the x coordinate of the vertex and then we're going to use negative b over 2a. We're going to use that formula. That's step 2. Step 3 says once you find your x coordinate, plug it back in to the original equation to get the y coordinate of your vertex. And then step 4, plot your vertex and graph using a table or patterns. Okay, now a little bit later, one of the questions I'm going to graph with the pattern and table so you can compare the two. But after that, I won't be using the table anymore. All right. Okay. And then don't forget your vertex is either your highest point your vertex is labeled XY. And so once you complete step 2, that'll give you the X. Once you plug it back in and complete step 3, that'll give you the Y. Okay? All right. Once you do that, that's what will happen there. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about the vertex in a second. But let's go ahead and do the vertex now. Once you have found your numbers that go into your vertex, once you have found that, that actually tells you a lot of stuff. Once you find your vertex, you have a lot of information. This right here is going to be called your axis of symmetry. And you'll write it as x equals whatever number you just wrote right there. Okay? The y right here is going to be your minimum or maximum at y equals. And it will depend if it opened up or down. So that's your You have your vertex, that's your axis of symmetry is already located, and that is your minimum or maximum already located. Okay. Now, and we'll do some more of that in a minute. So let's actually get into what I call patterns. And if patterns confuse you, use a table or whatever you got to do, to get your graphs. But here are the patterns, and this works on all quadratics because quadratics are symmetrical, which is why we have an axis of symmetry. And what that means is one side of the graph always mirrors the other side of the graph. Okay, so whatever I do to one side, I'm going to do to the other side essentially. Okay, so here are some patterns. When your A equals 1, your pattern is a 1, 3, and a 5. That is your base. All quadratics have a 1, 3, 5 pattern to start off. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. And if your A equals 2, use the 2, 6, 10 pattern. If your A equals 3, use 3, 9, 15. And let's say A equals a half. I'm going to use 0.5, 1.5, and 2.5. If you notice, all of these numbers all originate from this one. When A is 2, I just multiplied everything in line 2 by this first line in orange. When A is 3, I multiplied everything by 3. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, so for your patterns, all these numbers are right here. These numbers are always how many you go up. And another thing I want to point out, you always go over 1. Okay? All right, there's that.